Hey there, my name is Alexis, and I'm going to show you how I made this theft-proof cover for wireless security cameras using only sheet metal and construction adhesive. So my parents were interested in the security system for their house, but they didn't want to deal with cables going in and out of the house. So I went online and I found these wireless ones that connect to your Wi-Fi. They have their own app and they have cloud storage. But these are the types of cameras that you just screw on and off the wall, off their mount. So my parents were concerned about potential theft. So I designed this cover for the camera using sheet metal and construction adhesive, no welding required, so that you would have to remove the cover in order to access the camera. Even though I say it's theft proof, I would say it's more theft resistant. But in reality, almost anything can be stolen. It's like having a bike. If you don't want it to get stolen, use a bike lock, right? But if you use something that's very convenient, like a cable lock, it could be cut within a matter of seconds. So to minimize the chances of theft, use something that's more heavier duty, or go further beyond.
To go even further beyond!
And use two locks for locking your bike. Joking aside, if you don't want something to get stolen or less likely to be stolen, make it harder for it to get stolen. So going back to the build, I start off by making a quick stand using some scrap pieces of plywood. I just did pocket holes and then screwed it to my work table. And I did that so I can mount the camera to that scrap piece so that I can use the actual camera to make the profile for the actual cover. I use a sheet of cardboard to draw the side profile of the camera, making sure first that the camera is at the position it's going to be when it's actually mounted outside, so that I don't end up making the wrong size cover. I then refine the shape, making sure there's enough room and possibly giving it a little bit more wiggle room, adding maybe an extra 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of space around. Just make sure it's not too tight of a fit. I then cut out the shape off the cardboard so that I can retrace the shape on the actual sheet metal. I picked up a 12 inch by 18 inch piece of sheet metal so that it's enough to make two covers, but depending on the size of your camera, you may need larger or smaller. So I first marked a line that's about 1 inch off from one side, and that's going to represent the flares of the cover where the screws are going to go into and mount onto the wall. Then starting from that line, I mark out the side profile that I made earlier using the template. I then mark out another line from that side section, and that's going to represent the width of the actual camera cover. And you want to give yourself at least 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch of wiggle room there, just so you don't make it too tight, just in case you want to adjust the camera angle from side to side later on. So now I'm measuring the length of the front portion of the roof, and that line will be the same length as the first angled line from the top of the side profile. And then I trace that dimension along the length of the sheet metal. Once I mark out that first line, I'm going to go further down by the same distance, as that outer section is actually going to wrap underneath the roof of the cover in order to hold everything together when you use your construction adhesive to put everything into its final position. I then make a dashed line along the length of the roof wherever I'm going to make a bend to use as reference for later. The last thing to mark out is the gap between the side profile and along the length of the roof. Those little triangles I'm marking out right there, as those little tabs are going to be used to help adhere the side profile with the roof section later on. So the first cuts I need to do are along the length of the cover next to those tabs, so that I can have more flexibility with bending the roof portion of the cover. And I'm using Aviation Snips to cut the sheet metal. Just make sure the ones that you get are able to cut the right thickness or stronger than the thickness or gauge of material that you're using. So to actually bend the sheet metal, I initially used a small scrap piece of plywood to essentially hold down the part of the sheet metal that I don't want to bend in order to get leverage on the piece that I do want to bend. But it proved to be a little difficult for other sections later on. So for the second cover, I used a larger piece of wood and I clamped it to the edge of my work table so that I have a lot more space to freely bend it, and I don't have to worry about potentially scratching myself, while you should still wear gloves when doing this because there's still sharp corners there. So in regards to the direction of the bends you have to make, the triangular tabs, the sections of the roof, all need to be bending in the same direction, or upward or downward, however you want to look at it. But the flares of the cover actually need to be bending in the opposite direction. But before bending it, you should cut the middle section and bend it in the same direction as the tabs and the roof before you bend the side flares in the opposite direction. In that middle section along the flare that I cut, I don't really need it, so I'm just going to clamp it down to just have it flat against the metal. I then bend the sides in the same direction as the tabs and the roof. Lastly, I want the roof section to wrap around the triangular tabs, so the tabs are on the inside of the cover, and then I just firmly press it, or I use a clamp to just hold everything down just so it can get used to that shape. Now all that's left is to bond the metal together, but before doing so, I want to do a quick test fit, make sure there's enough space around the camera so that it's not too tight or it's not potentially scratching it. So one of the last things to do is to bond the metal together. I use construction adhesive. It bonds basically anything together, wood, metal, plastic, etc. But before I bond the metal, I tape off the outside where the seams are exposed so that when the construction adhesive squeezes out, it'll be an easier cleanup. And you want to be generous with the amount of adhesive you're applying because you need a strong bond for this to work. So make sure you're applying adhesive where metal is in contact with metal. Once I've applied all the construction adhesive on all contact surfaces, I use a clamp to press down on the inside and the outside of the roof to make sure it doesn't open up on itself as it cures. I then clean up the outside seams for any squeeze out, as well as if there's any open gaps on the seams, I'll fill that in with more adhesive because I don't want anything going into those seams and potentially compromising the bond. I then add one more clamp on the sides just to make sure it doesn't open up outward as well, and then I leave it to cure. Once the curing time has passed, I unclamp everything, clean up any residue that I missed. I then test the bond to make sure it's strong enough. If I put a bit of force on it, it doesn't fall apart on me, and luckily it appears to be strong enough, but we'll see later on if the bond gets weaker or if the winter months potentially affected, but it appears this method of bonding metal on metal works, so I'm going to call this a success. All that's left are to make the holes for the screws that are going to mount the cover onto the wall. And since there were still some sharp edges along the cover, I used 80 grit sandpaper to just soften those corners so you don't potentially scratch yourself or cut yourself when handling it. And I want to make it look nice, so I'm going to paint it a glossy white. Make sure you use metal primer if you are going to paint. I do about 2 to 3 coats for both primer and paint. You could also go the extra step and put clear coat as well. But all that's left is to just mount it to the wall. And before making the holes for the cover, I would make sure the cover can't be seen on camera. So, just to make your final adjustments there before you make your holes. And depending on the material you're using, make sure you're using the right type of bit. For my case, I'm drilling into brick, so I got to use a masonry bit. So make sure you're using anchors and the right type of screw. Just follow the directions on the box. Just make sure it's masonry or whatever material you're using. Another thing I would recommend that I picked up is this pan head screw cover, which is basically a plastic washer that has a cover so you can't see the head of the screw, which is a nice theft deterrent as well, I would say, for applications like this. It also makes the cover look a lot nicer since you don't have to see the different colored screws, so it's a nice aesthetic feature as well. So thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video. If you like it, give it a like. Consider subscribing if you're interested in more videos like this. I have a few new ones coming very soon. If you have any questions, let me know down below. But yeah, I think it's a good way to learn how to do metal bending with lightweight materials, as well as how to bond metal without having to rely on welding tools or anything expensive like that. If you're looking to do some lightweight metal projects with just thin sheet metal, I think this is a good video to use for reference. As sheet metal comes in different thicknesses and sizes, there's a lot of possibilities there. And the only power tool I used was a power drill, so I think most people can do something like this for whatever needs they have. But yeah, thanks for watching and take care.